Welcome to my ongoing series on learning 3D LUT Creator. Today we tackle the Channel Mixer tab. And I'll ask you one favor, if you find content like this useful, I'd certainly appreciate your support by having you click on the subscribe button below. Let's get right to the video. So today we're going to be tackling the Channel Mixer in 3D LUT Creator. And we get to that by going here and clicking Channels. And as usual, we get to a pretty foreign looking interface. Now, there's some good news and some bad news, I hate to tell you, about the Channel Mixer. The good news, which I'm going to show you in just a moment, is that it's far better than the Photoshop Channel Mixer, in that it's not going to break your photograph in the same way that the Photoshop Channel Mixer can. The bad news is that the A, B, and the CL grids, when we use them, what we were going to get by making changes were really pretty predictable. The Channel Mixer, not so much. There's still a lot of unpredictability to it, and there are some rules which I'm going to go over with you, but I'm also going to show you why, even with those rules, there's still a good deal of unpredictability, let's call it, with the Channel Mixer. First, let's go over the good news. So I'm going to go to Photoshop. And I have this image here. And to go over to the Channel Mixer in Photoshop, we just come down here and we choose a Channel Mixer adjustment level. Now, the best way to work with Channel Mixer in Photoshop isn't to try to adjust what channel is within another channel. It's simply to set the blending mode to luminosity and hit monochrome. And now you have a situation where you can select and adjust the percentage of each channel that makes up your photograph. So the total has to be 100%. And here we have how the channels are set to equal that 100%. Now I can make changes and have the red channel predominate, for example, or the green channel, or the blue channel. But you're immediately going to see a couple of problems. First of all, I can't double click this to reset it. It's one of the old legacy type ones where you have to just physically do it yourself, or put in here what the number you want. But this becomes key here because it's very easy to break your photograph. What do I mean? Look, if I go over 100, I've totally ruined this photo. I haven't really changed the colors. I've just blown everything out. So you're going to need to play around and make sure this is equal to 100. And if we make a change here, we have to play around and make a change somewhere else. And we're constantly making changes to restore the brightness of the photograph. And again, if we go too far, and it's not just that blue channel, if we go too far with any channel, we're going to wreck this photograph. And it's, let's just say it's not a very easy tool to use, which is why it's not used very much and why people are unfamiliar with trying to make adjustments using the Channel Mixer. Even if I was to go back and do it the other way, where I'm adjusting the percentage within each channel and making some significant color changes, I still need to make sure that this equals 100% or things get really wonky. It's more than just color changes. There's changes in brightness, etc., that have to be normalized. We'll go to 3D LUT Creator. We'll bring in this image by clicking on Image from Photoshop, and we're good to go. Now, what I'm going to show you here is this is 100% of each channel, and this is the percentage of each channel that's within the channel. So for example, the red channel is 100% the red channel, and it makes up 100%. The green channel is 100% green. The blue channel is 100% of the blue channel. But if we start, let's not worry about the colors yet, but if we start making changes, for example, on the blue channel, you could see the totals still remain 100. So basically what's happening is that 3D LUT Creator is making internal normalizations, internal calculations, so that when you make a change, you can't break that photo by blowing it all out, because the channels are constantly equal to 100%. So any change you make is being automatically normalized. You can't break your photo. You can make it look horrendous, but you can't do the horrible things that you can do to the photograph that we just saw in Photoshop. So that's the good news. Let's reset this. So what's the bad news? The bad news is that although there are rules I'm going to demonstrate to you, the colors in your photograph are never really pure, in the sense of, oh, I can give you a rule about what happens if you move blue towards green. But the fact is that, this sky probably isn't pure blue. There's probably some blue, there's some cyan, there's some magenta. Likewise, the sand isn't yellow. It's yellow, it has some red in it. And so when I make a change to the color of one channel, or when I make a change to the component colors of one channel, like if I want to affect the red channel, it's going to have an effect on the sand, but it's also going to have some effect on other colors as well, because most colors are composed of some degree of red, some degree of green, and some degree of blue. And we can see that. We can actually look at our channels, and you can see there are some keyboard shortcuts, Control 3, 4, and 5 in a Windows. And 3 will give you red, 4 green, 5 blue. So let's do that. Control 3. So that is the red channel. And you can see that there is equal components of red in multiple different areas. Green. And I should mention that each channel has a slight tint to it. So you can see this is green because it has a slight green tint. That's not the color in the photo. It's just letting you know which channel you're looking at. And the degree of green in the channel is going to be dependent on the amount of white. The more white there is, the more green. And the darker the channel, the less green in there. But you can see there's green in the clouds and green in the sand. And finally, the blue channel, well, there's a lot of blue in the sky, but there was also green and red in the sky, and not so much of blue in the sand, and almost none in the tree. But you can see how the colors are not pure. The colors are made up of multiple different colors. And so when you affect, for example, your blues or your reds, the colors in your image that you might not identify as blue or red are going to change because you're changing the blue and red components of those colors. So we'll go back to the main image and start talking about some of the rules, even though what I just explained to you, the bad news is that the rules aren't going to be perfectly followed in the way you think they will, because there's unpredictability based on the component colors within each color in your image. Okay, so let's talk about these rules. Even though there's unpredictability because colors are composed of red, green, and blue for each color, even though there's that unpredictability, the rules are still functioning in the background. So let's take a look at what's happening, what these rules are. Let's start off with the fact that this triangle, if we move the points along this triangle, the saturations are going to stay the same. And if you notice, the colors transition, if we go red to blue, in between is purple. And there's a clue here. And I wrote in a color wheel as well so that we can see what happens to purer colors. It's on the same photo. I just added it to the photo. So if we take the red point and we pull it towards the blue, what happens is this purple gets pushed into the blue. So the blue turns purplish and the red goes away. There's less red. So here's the blue, and here's the red, and here's the blue, and obviously there's some red in the sand. So I'm going to stay on the line approximately, and I'm going to go as such. And you can see that the blue has turned magenta because we've pushed this magenta into the blue. Likewise, the sky has turned magenta. Why has the sand turned green? The yellows have turned green. Well, there's less red. Taking away red is the same approximately as adding cyan because they're the opposite colors. So if I go to Photoshop and I've added a selective color layer so we can see what would happen, I've chosen the yellows because the sand is sort of yellow. And if I add cyan, the sand turns green. The same thing as we've seen here by taking away the reds. Okay, let's try it with another point. I'm going to reset the grid. Okay, let's try moving another point along the line. Here we have blue to green. And in between the blue and the green, the transition is cyan. So if I pull this point on the line this way, the cyan will be pushed over and the greens should start to turn cyan. So we should add cyan here. And there will be less blue. So we can look at the blue in the sky. Let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to push, and you can see the greens have become more cyanish. The sand has become more cyanish, and there's less blue in the sky. Now if we go to Photoshop for a moment, and we switch the selective colors to blues, and taking away blue is a lot like adding yellow. If we add yellow to the sky, you can see that the color becomes quite similar. Now if we keep going, you can see the blues essentially all go away and the greens become cyan. Okay, so I've reset the grid, and I should mention how we do that. So if I just move something, there's two ways to reset that point. The first is just to come up here, like on all the other tabs. There's a reset button. But also, if I move this over here, I can also reset it by just double-clicking it. And that way, if I move more than one of these tabs, I don't have to reset the whole grid. I can just reset one of the tabs. But let's go on to rule number 2. We talked about the saturation staying the same as long as we move the points along this triangle. What if we move them outside or inside the triangle? So that rule that functions in the background is that if we take the point and we move it outside the triangle, saturation increases, and if we move it inside the triangle, saturation decreases. So let's take a look at what we just did. If I pull the red point up here, the red gets very saturated, and you can see the red in the sand has become saturated. Why has the sky turned more cyan? Well, we talked before about pushing, if we go like this, pushing the magenta into the blue. But if I go like this, not only am I saturating the reds because I've pulled them outside the triangle, but I'm increasing the distance between these 2 points. And so, because the distance is greater, there's going to be less magenta in those blues because the transition point is further away from the blues. So, if that's true, let's go to Photoshop. Let's switch this selective color to the blues so we can see what's going on in the sky. And I said we're decreasing the magentas because we pulled that line further away. So if I go to selective color and decrease the magenta in the sky, look what happens to the sky. It turns cyan. Just like here. Of course, we've accentuated it here. But you can see the same thing happens. All right, let's reset that and just try it with another point. So I'm going to take the greens, pull them out here. That is going to saturate the greens, and you can see the sand which had a sort of yellowish green and a little bit of red color to it has now become much more green because the greens in it are much more saturated. The sky's turned purple. We've pulled this distance out and made this line longer. Thus, the transition point, which was in the middle of the line before, is now more this way. So we've basically pulled, by lengthening this line, we've pulled the cyans out of the blues. What happens if you pull cyan out of the blue in the sky? Let's go to Photoshop. To our selective color, we're looking at blues for the sky. We're pulling cyan out, and the sky turns purple, just like it did here. Again, we've made it more, we've accentuated it more than we can in Photoshop, but it's the same idea. By pulling this out, we're taking the cyan out of the sky, making it purple, and saturating the greens and bringing out those greens in the sand that are there. I've reset the grid. And the third and final rule I want to talk about is that when we move a point away from where it started, not only are we changing the colors and removing, for example, if I moved the red point down, the blues should get more magenta, the reds should decrease. But not only do we lose red, but the reds that remain become darker. So the best way to show you this is on the color wheel here. So I'm going to move these reds, the red point down. So you can see the blues became very magenta, and what remains of the red became darker. Now, there may come a time, again, this is simplified on the color wheel, but there may come a time where we like this shift of blue to magenta, but we wish the reds didn't darken. And thus, we have the lighten and darken slider here. So if I want to remove this darkening effect from the reds, but keep the color shift of blue to magenta, I can take this slider, and by going to the left, I can remove the darkening. See, the darkening is now at 0 instead of where it started at 100%. So I'm going to remove the darkening. The blues remain magenta, but the reds are not darker anymore. And if I come down here, you can see the more magenta, but the reds, the darkness of the reds stays the same. And of course, there's a slider here where I don't have to completely remove the darkening. I can go in stages. If you move points away in the other direction, besides the increased saturation, they also become lighter, and I can remove that lightness however much I want. It's sort of a regulator, if you will, on top of whatever you're doing here. So we've really covered a ton of information here about the channel mixer, but I wanted to just show you one thing to reinforce to you what I mean about the unpredictability. We have the blue sky. If I go to the AB grid and grab the blues, I can change the color of the sky, but I'm only affecting the blue. Notice how no matter what color I'm making the sky, the only thing I'm affecting is the blue and the sand, because the sand, remember that color is over here. The sand color spoke I'm not changing. So I can make the sky whatever color I want it to be without changing the color of the sand. I can change the sand without changing the color of the sky. Right? I'm going to reset that. But when I go to the channel mixer, I'm not just affecting the blues when I move the blue point. I'm affecting the blue component of every color in the image, not just the blues. So therefore, when I move the blue point, it's not just the blue color of the sky that changes. The sand changes too, because I'm changing the blue component within the color of the sand. So they're very different animals. And for that reason, it's easy to predict what you're doing with the colors in the A, B, and the CL grid, and a lot more difficult to predict what you're going to do with the colors in the image when you're using the channel mixer. But you can get some really interesting effects with the channel mixer. And maybe we'll look into that further next week in terms of actually using it to get some color shifts and some color grading effects. But in the meantime, again, some of the unpredictability is really part of the excitement of using it, because you're not entirely sure what you're going to get. You can't entirely predict it. You may have an idea of which way things are going to move because of the rules, but you can get some interesting surprises. And that's what makes it fun to use. And it's a whole lot easier to use it here than it is in Photoshop. And again, very intuitive because of the way, I shouldn't say very intuitive. It's not intuitive, but you can get some ideas of what the shifts are going to be by using this, and it gives you the answers and the effects that you might get in real time. All right, I think we've covered enough for today. But if I could just suggest one thing in the meantime, it would be just to take a couple images, go to the channel mixer, and play around and see what you get. You might be surprised. Well, we certainly covered a lot today. I hope you found it useful. If you have 3D LUT Creator, why not get some images out and play around with the channel mixer tab and see what you come up with. We'll see you next time.